All right, we're here. It's Talking Shop. No Tim today. That's all right. He went to see his kids and such, and that's a good way for him to spend a week. And he's even with Paul sometime this week.
Oh.
So hopefully he says hi to Paul for us. Otherwise, hi Paul. You'll see this. For now, though, we are taking a look at Proper 4. This is for June 2nd of 2024, or whenever this text comes up again in the lectionary. But it's 2 Corinthians. It's Paul's letter to the church at Corinth. We're looking at the 4th chapter, verses 5 through 12. Hope to give you some ideas for how to preach this, maybe a couple of sermon structure suggestions. But for now, God bless your preaching, and let's get after it.
Leave away, spit on my Lord in every way, yet I'm still welcome.
All right, welcome back to Talking Shop. We are taking a look at, this is Proper 4. This is the first Sunday after...
Second Sunday after Pentecost.
Second Sunday after Pentecost, but the first one after Trinity, depending on how you count these Sundays. But Proper 4 nonetheless. Our text for today is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 5 through 12, and we'll just take this couple verses at a time and figure out what kind of structure we might want to use to
We'll make
preach
do
this.
without Tim this week.
Yeah, well, we'll make do without Tim, our fearless leader. So here we go. Verse 5. For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. So what's Paul doing here? Why is he talking like this?
I think that he, as an apostle, is making a case why, one, he's making a defense that he is not just self-promoting,
Mm-hmm.
that he, as we're about to get to, the suffering and persecution that he's facing isn't just because he is an arrogant jerk.
Right.
Right? He's doing these things for Jesus' sake,
Mm-hmm.
or these things are happening to him for Jesus' sake.
Yeah, and you could maybe make the case that at one point or another, Paul was a selfish jerk, and he had made things.
In Romans 7, he still is.
Yeah, true. Yeah, the good he wants to do, he can't do it. The evil he doesn't want to do, he continues to do it.
But I think even this verse 5, there's a whole lot to preach in there about not preaching ourselves, but
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ is Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. You can talk about vocation and that you are serving other people in your vocation, not as a self-promotion. You're not trying to build an empire or build your own ego, but that you are serving other people because you have been served.
So Paul wouldn't have had paultheapostle.com for
Right.
himself. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it is, and that whole, right, God doesn't need our good works, but our neighbor does.
Yeah.
That whole thing, which seems to, at least in my congregation, not be something that they have been taught for years and years.
Yeah.
It's kind of a newer idea, a newer concept for them.
Right.
That we think outside of ourselves. What does our community need? What do our neighbors need? How do we serve them?
Right.
And we don't serve them in order to get something in return from them.
Right.
Which is often we need to grow our membership and we need more people in the pews.
Yeah.
So that we feel good about ourselves, so that we know that we're a successful congregation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're going to do this thing to get something back from you. And that's this reciprocal kind of service.
Yeah.
And that's not what Paul's talking about here.
Right. More like in John the Baptist's words, I must decrease that Christ may increase.
Right. But actually looking at what does your community and your neighbor actually need, and how can you genuinely serve them
Yeah.
because of their need,
Right.
not so that you get something in return.
Right. Yeah, I think that leads well into the next verse, verse 6. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. We're not really, like, it's not really our light, right? It's
Right.
It doesn't say "let your light shine" like the Kobo song says,
Right.
that the whole world might see. No, it's the light of Christ, that
Right.
that they might see Christ through me. And
Right.
Paul even talks that way. I think it's in Corinthians where he says, imitate me insofar as I imitate Christ, but like all the other junk, just don't imitate my junk. Imitate
Right.
where I imitate Christ, because it's the light of Christ that we're seeking to shine, because that light has shined or shone, as the text says, onto us, and we're more like a mirror,
Right.
or like the moon. That's a good image. The moon reflects the sun and gives light. And good. Anything else on verse 6?
I think this, the glory of God in the person of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can under-preach that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there's a boatload to preach in there about, if you want to know what God is like, look to Jesus. And so the glory of God is in the person of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is who we're proclaiming. That's what we're all about. We're all about Jesus.
Yeah.
We're not about the institution itself. We're not about the programs.
Mm-hmm.
We're not about all of these great things that have been built.
Yeah.
It's not about those things being promoted and being sustained in themselves. Those things all support, or are supposed to support, the proclamation of Jesus.
Yeah. They're means to the end, and the end is proclaiming Christ.
Right.
And if whatever your programmatic thing is that your congregation is doing out there, if it isn't seeking to proclaim Christ to the nations,
Right.
it may need a little bit of a revamp.
Right.
Good. Verse 7, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. Again, echoing back to verse 5, we're just servants.
Right.
Like on Good Shepherd Sunday, people say, well, yeah, you're the shepherd that the Good Shepherd has sent to us. And I'm like, I'm just a dog.
Right.
Right. I like sheepdog better because I'm here to nip at your ankles and,
Right.
keep you going in the right direction. He's the one with the rod and the staff. I'm just the guy barking at you.
Right. When our congregation is out in the community doing something, or when we open our church doors and people come to our property and they meet me, they always ask, "You're the pastor?"
Right.
I say, "Yeah," and nobody's more surprised about that than me. Right? Like they don't expect me to be the pastor.
Yeah. That's why I wear the clerical on Sundays, because
Right.
I look like this.
Right.
And that's the only distinguishing thing for me is
Right.
that I'm wearing the black shirt with the tab.
I'm the one in uniform.
Yeah.
Right? It's not about me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about my great oratory skills, because I missed that class in seminary. Right? It's not about my charisma. It's not about me having this great personality, and being this great speaker. It's not about me at all. Like, all of my faults, all of my failures,
Mm-hmm.
God has still called me to proclaim this message, even in spite of me, right?
Yeah.
It's certainly not me. I'm not that smart. I'm not that charismatic, and I'm not that good of a preacher, right? And so this treasure of Christ crucified, died and risen for the forgiveness of all of my sin, is this treasure in this broken, not all that awesome body, personality, right? That is like from my own experience, this treasure in this jar of clay.
Yeah. We're the manure that facilitates growth in the garden.
Right.
Yeah. Good. And I've always been interested by this verse here, the jars of clay, because I mean, that speaks to the fact that we're made of dirt, right? That
Yeah.
ashes to ashes, dust to dust, but also that we're super fragile. And it doesn't take much. And like if you're in the pastor group on Facebook, you hear guys talking about their congregations like breaking them, and not in a good way, like because we're jars of clay.
Yeah.
Right? And that's good because God uses weak and broken men to proclaim that He is not weak,
Right.
but that He is actually strong, and His power is made perfect in our manure-ish life that we live
Right.
here on this side of the veil of tears. The power that belongs to God, it's not us.
Right. I think that this next verse 8, you're hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed, perplexed, yet not despairing. And into verse 9, persecuted, yet not forsaken, struck down, yet not destroyed. I think that's going to be a hard one for most of our people, because their experience of being hard pressed and crushed and persecuted for the sake of their faith is not in most of their repertoires. That's not most of their experience here in the Western world.
Yeah, especially if you have an older congregation who has, for the majority of their existence as a Christian person, was in Christendom, and the church having a sort of a popular opinion in the culture. The church was seen as a good, and overall people still seek, I mean, it's not all the time, but people still seek the church for answers. We're not afflicted the same way Paul was.
Right.
We're not persecuted the way our brothers and sisters in Israel, who are Christians and are being,
Or our Christian brothers and sisters in Palestine either.
or in Palestine either. Right. Yeah. I mean, they're being raped and tortured and killed for the fact that they're not the other thing.
Right.
That's true affliction. That's true persecution.
Right.
And I would be tempted in this section of the text to talk about first world problems, sort of as like a lead into, we get upset when our charging cord isn't long enough to reach the couch,
Right.
because we want to sit there and scroll.
Right.
We're mad when we have tons of food, but it's nothing that we want to eat.
Right.
We haven't experienced this yet.
Right.
And there is that yet that I think we as pastors have to prepare our people.
Right.
Because and maybe I'm wrong, and I pray I am wrong, that we're not persecuted like that, because nobody wants to be in pain, right? But I think it is part of our calling to prepare our folks that you are going to be persecuted for your faith. It's coming.
Right. Yet, although given the average age in most LCMS congregations, it's coming, but most of our members probably won't be alive for it.
Yeah.
Unless Jesus returns first, which is going to be awesome.
Yep.
But,
Yeah. Lord have mercy.
Right.
Christ have mercy. Come, Lord Jesus, come quickly.
Right. So we have been spared from this for now. But what an opportunity to pray for the global church who is facing persecution.
Yeah.
Right. Pray for them and their faith.
Yeah.
And God watching over them and protecting them. Right. And as the church in the West continues to look more and more like the early church.
Yep.
Right. So pray for the next generations of Christians.
Yeah, and pray for your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren that maybe aren't born yet.
Yeah.
And that the faith, A, would continue in your family,
Right.
and B, that they would, as Revelation 2:10 says, that they would be faithful to the point of death and receive the crown of life.
Yeah. I might just take a paragraph of my sermon and give at least point to the church historic. That persecution is nothing new for the church, and that God has always preserved his church. People's lives may not have been preserved, but Jesus has overcome death. right? And so that's only, in view of the resurrection, death is only temporary.
Right.
And so God has a long history of taking care of his church.
Yep.
Throughout history, right? The history of Christian mission is a history of persecution and martyrdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so this isn't new. The church has survived. The word continues to be proclaimed. And so given that God has a long track record of seeing his people through that, we expect that he is going to be faithful to his people and continue to see them through that. So yes, this is awful, but persevere and have faith that God's going to see you through it.
Yeah, patient endurance is forget how many times it's said in the whole of the Bible, but it's some like 50 times that we are called to patiently endure whatever comes our way. To your point about the church historic always being in persecution in some way, shape, or form, and I even said this a few minutes ago, like we don't strive to be persecuted, but when we are, what we fail to realize is that God actually grows his church in persecution. And it's, the coyote problem is rampant everywhere in our country right now. And the church is like the coyotes, because when coyotes have pressure put on them, or when people start hunting them, they multiply. The females go into heat if one of them doesn't call back at night. They get pregnant and they have 4 pups to replace the one that was killed. And so that's kind of a beautiful picture of Christ's church, that when one martyr is martyred for the faith, how many Christians does that raise up?
Yeah.
So that's
Verse 10.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
We always carry around in our body the death of the Lord Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body.
And maybe we should just close it out with the last 2 verses, because they're part of that same thought, I think. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. Before we turn the cameras on, I was trying to get us to decide what sort of structure we might take a look at for this. And I think I came to 2 conclusions. I don't know if you were on the same page with it or not, but this text could be a paradox maintained, which is where you, according to Concordia theology, right? It's this structure where you identify what the paradox is, and then you give both sides of the paradox and say how we fail in this, and then bring them back to the truth of what the scriptures say. So, for instance, in this text, we would look at, it would probably focus more on these last couple of verses: afflicted, not crushed; perplexed, but not driven to despair; persecuted, but not forsaken; struck down, and not destroyed. So you could look at the ways that we're afflicted as Christians today, and then talk about where we fail in our afflictions, and then bring them back to the fact that we're not crushed, and then go to the other side. We're not crushed, and then we fail in that somehow of not being crushed, and bring them back to the paradox itself. And then what was the other one? It was the Rossau one, where you take a picture of Paul's life and something that he experienced, something that he lived through in his life as a Christian, and you gave some good examples of that. Like he was literally persecuted, struck down like by rocks. They tried to stone him outside of, what city was that? It doesn't matter. You can find it in the book of Acts. He was struck down, but he wasn't destroyed, right? They thought he was dead, but he got up and he walked away from it. And then you use that as your inroad to talking about first Paul and then about your people.
Yeah, good. I think these last 3 verses, I'm going to make an emphasis on staying connected to Jesus, right? And that you stay connected to Jesus, and you can even bring in the body of Christ, in that you stay connected to the body and to Jesus himself by gathering together in worship, gathering together with other believers, being connected to the word proclaimed, Lord's Supper, remembering your baptism, all of these things that the Lord gives us to bring us assurance and comfort that we are not disconnected from Jesus, but that we are still connected to him, and that is what sees us through all the persecution and even death itself. So that we're not preaching ourselves, back to the beginning, but Jesus Christ is Lord.
Yeah, you could tie that in with the other 2 texts of the Deuteronomy text and the Mark text, because they're both about Sabbath. And I even preached this last week on it was the vine and the branches, right? Abiding in Jesus. And you go to the places that Jesus has promised he will be, right? You don't, seek and you will find, right? Seek Jesus in all things. Look for him. And, I watch a Disney movie and I see Jesus, right? And,
Absolutely.
But
there's really only one story to tell.
Yeah, right. That's right. And they're all, as Donovan Riley says, all the pagans are just ripping off God.
Yep.
So you could use this idea of Sabbath, and that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, and he actually truly is our Sabbath.
Right.
And so that's why we're not crushed. That's why because we're carrying this death and resurrection of Jesus within our bodies. And because of that, we fear the one who can kill the soul, not the one who can kill the body.
Yeah. Let that light shine out of the darkness.
Yep, because it's a dark world out there.
Yep. That about do it?
I think that does it. Like it, subscribe it,
Thanks for joining us.
and God bless your preaching.